What is code? If you don't work with code or you haven't coded something before, it probably seems a bit strange to think about code. It might seem like some weird abstract idea that's really hard to understand and that only certain people can do, or you have to have a certain knack for it, but really it's not like that at all. Code is honestly simpler than more people give it credit for, I think at least. It's basically just a set of instructions, and just like if you have a recipe for a certain type of food, the recipe is just a series of instructions. But more than that, it's not only the instructions, but the input to those instructions. So you have all of the inputs, which are the ingredients, and the instructions, which tell you what to do with those ingredients. So just like that, code is the same way. So it's really, you can tell code to do any type of thing you want that can be broken down into a set of instructions. So it can send a message for you, just like an email or an IM. It has an address, just like a letter, and you have some body of the message, and it needs to get sent to the right person. And it travels through a series of networks over the internet and gets eventually to the right person. And this is exactly like the post office. It works in almost the same way. So those are the series of steps for delivering a message. Similarly, you could write a series of instructions to find you the best pizza place around. So if you wanted to find, okay, I want all the pizza places that are the best ones near me. So how do we break this down into instructions? Well, the first thing we need to do is figure out where we are, and from that we have GPS. So once we know where we are, we can compare that to a giant list of restaurants. From that giant list of restaurants, we can say which ones are the closest. And that's just a matter of subtracting their distance from our distance, and then sorting that list in descending order. Once we have the closest restaurants to us, we can break it down into another step. Take all of those restaurants and only give me back the ones which sell pizza on their menu. Then we can break that down into another set of instructions. Get all the user ratings for those pizza places, sort by user rating, and give me the top 10. So we broke down a question, what are the best pizza places around me, into a series of steps that we can use to execute and actually answer the question. So we said with the recipe that you have the inputs to the instructions. Well, with code, the inputs to the instructions aren't necessarily ingredients, but they're called variables. And variables might sound abstract, but really we create variables in our head every single day. And it's actually pretty much how we process the world. Variables such as animals. Animals, we can create a variable called animal, which could be assigned any type of animal. Similarly, we could create a variable called ingredient and have that be a list of our ingredients in our recipe. And each of those ingredients might have another type, which is a variable, which could be dry or wet. And there are any number of dry or wet ingredients. So we can assign a value, say flour, to a variable, say dry ingredient. And then we can put that in our list of ingredients, which could be another variable. And that is the input to our series of instructions called a recipe. So with code, you're probably not going to deal with ingredients which are foods or animals all the time. So some actual variables that we might use in code are things like a user. And a user has attributes within it. So we might have a variable called user, which has several subvariables assigned to it. And each of those subvariables could be name. And your name could be anything. So we say the user's name, which is another variable, has a value of Hayden if it's me. Similarly, another type of variable we could use is a quantity. So if we have a quantity variable, that just means that it's holding some value, usually a numeric value, could also be a string value, which you type in with your keyboard. So if it's a numeric value, then a number by itself doesn't do us any good. There's no value in saying, okay, this is the number 4, and I'll assign it to this variable. But when the value comes in is when we actually give meaning to a value, to a numeric value. So this could be the speed of the car, and we can use that variable to calculate how quickly we need to stop. And that calculation would be written in code, and that's the series of instructions we would use to input the speed and perhaps input the current distance from an obstacle. And given those two variables, we calculate how quickly we need to stop. So that's all code really is. It's just a series of instructions with inputs and outputs. And we use those instructions just like a recipe to do something useful. And the inputs are variables, and variables are just an assignment or a bucket of a thing that we can give a concrete value to, like a number, or a set of variables like name, age, birth date, things like that. So that's it. That's what code is at a high level. And if you ever are interested in learning code, just keep those things in mind. That's all it is, no matter what language you're working with. And that should help you on your journey if you're trying to understand how to write software in the future. That's the biggest things to keep in mind, is at a conceptual level, you've got inputs, outputs, and a recipe of instructions that you're writing. It's just a matter of how do you actually write those instructions in the code. That's it.